حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله.
The first thing I want to talk about on this topic is that it's very important from the outset that we recognize that this is not just specifically a Muslim problem. Okay, I've done a number of initiatives on this topic, and when I've spoken to people in the Muslim community, especially imams and community, they say, why are you highlighting this as if it's a Muslim problem? And I said, no, it's not a Muslim problem in the sense that it does actually affect everybody. Okay, so from a government perspective, when they talk about domestic abuse and forced marriage, they mean the problem as a whole. But are we immune from this problem? No, it definitely happens in our community. So we have to take responsibility to address it in our community. Other people need to take the responsibility to address it in our communities, and that's really what we're trying to do. Okay, so we're not saying, this is specific to the Muslim community, but we are one of the communities in this country which it affects. So domestic abuse and forced marriage is not associated with any particular religion or religious practice. Okay, and statistically they have seen it across communities, and it happens in the Christian community, it happens in the Sikh community, Hindu community, and so on. Okay. The second thing is I want to explain why or how I got involved in this topic. So back in 2007, which seems a long time ago now, 7 years ago, what happened was there was a women's organisation in Scotland, and they got in contact with me, and they'd written a booklet on domestic abuse, and the title was what Islam really says about domestic abuse. And what they wanted me to do was just read the booklet. First of all, they said, look, we've asked all these other imams to read it, and no one's got back to us. And we need to basically print this now, so we want to make sure there's nothing wrong with it. When I read the booklet, obviously I wanted to do a bit of background reading. Okay, what is this? I was totally unaware of the issue. And I was actually still studying applicational study. I was only back for a short period. And when I looked into it, I was astounded by the statistics. And I actually thought I thought this must be made up. There's no way this can be true. What did I discover? It's the greatest killer of women in this country. It kills more women than cancer. Right? If you go to Women's Aid website, they'll tell you approximately 2 women are killed in the UK every week. Every week, 2 women are killed through domestic violence. And I literally was about to fall off my chair when I read that. I was like, what? 1 in 4 women experience domestic abuse or domestic violence in their lifetime, and between 1 in 8 to 1 in 10 will experience it annually. So this is obviously a very widespread problem. Every minute, a domestic violence call is made to the police in the UK, and women on average suffer 35 domestic assaults before they call the police. So every minute is a call. Every minute's going past, there's a call going to the police in the UK somewhere on this topic. And before that call has been made, that woman has been assaulted 35 times on average. So this is a huge problem for everybody. Okay. And in Scotland, obviously it's smaller, but it's approximately 50,000 cases every year, and it's going up. The stats are going up. So when I read this, I thought, subhanAllah, this is shocking. And it made me more motivated to read that booklet and to do justice to it. So when I read the booklet, it was kind of all over the place, and it wasn't really addressing the issue. So I went back to him. I said, look, I'm sorry, but I can't approve this booklet. He said, well, I said, it's got all these issues. And they said, look, well, we're going to print this. We've been given funding, we need to print this. It's going to go to the police, statutory bodies, and so on. And so I said, look, the topic's too important, let me write it. And so this is how I got involved. So I ended up writing the booklet for them. And the challenge was, it had to be read by Muslims and non-Muslims. I only had 4,000 words. So, if you've got 2 hours to say something, it's a lot easier than saying in 2 minutes. In fact, one of my teachers was saying this. He came to the UK, and they used to do khutbahs, like the Jummah prayer, the Jummah sermons. He used to explain spending an hour now at least. So when he came here, he was told that he got 10 minutes. So people work here, then you get in and out. And he said it's harder for me to do in 10 minutes than in an hour. He's got to summarise what you put in, what you take out. So anyway, it's a bit of a difficult task because how much can you say in 4,000 words? However, I tried to make it as non-technical as possible so that as many people can understand it. Alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was a success. But the issue was that you have to address, the core issue in this topic, which is relevant to us. The issue that they had was they were saying that there were some men, when domestic abuse was reported, they would say, well, you don't understand my culture. In my religion or my culture, I'm allowed to do this. So the police were like, well, like cultural sensitivities, do we get involved, do we not get involved? So this was the problem. So then that begs the question, if that's how widespread and that's how much the problem is in the UK, is it higher in the Muslim community, is it lower in the Muslim community? So what I then did was I looked at statistics for ethnic minorities, because there are no statistics for the Muslim community per se. What's called the black ethnic minorities. And the statistics basically said that there was no evidence to say there was more in the Muslim community than the indigenous population. However, it is different. Why is it different? It's estimated that it takes a woman from black ethnic minorities an average of 10 years before they leave a violent relationship. So this is where we get into cultural factors which make domestic violence or domestic abuse. You have to deal with it in a certain way or a different way from the way you deal with it with other communities. So what are the kind of cultural barriers? Well, the first is not wanting to tell outsiders of abuse taking place. And one of the roles that I play in Scotland is through an organisation called Unity Family Services. And what we do is we deal with family problems, marital problems in the Muslim community. And a lot of the times you're dealing with a couple and it's too late. And you say to them, why did you come earlier? And they say, well, we don't want to tell other people outside the family. We thought we could resolve ourselves. So it's a cultural thing. We wanted to keep it indoors. Feeling that the honour or izzat of the family, or that they will bring shame, sharm, upon them if they seek help from the authorities. Okay, so family honour, maybe other family members say, oh, why did you do that? Why did you tell the police? That the whole community knows about our problem, and you brought shame upon us. So the victim actually gets blamed here. The majority of domestic abuse is not reported to the police at all. This is generally, not just the Muslim community, but generally, with all the bad statistics I just gave you, a lot of domestic violence is still not reported at all. And obviously, because of these cultural barriers, it's probably even more so in the Muslim community. So the extent of the problem in ethnic minorities would probably be higher than statistics indicate. Okay, so this is a serious problem that we've got. Now, a very important distinction. Domestic violence or domestic abuse, you've probably seen me using abuse, the term of domestic abuse rather than domestic violence. In England, they actually use the term domestic violence. But in Scotland, they actually changed it to domestic abuse. And I think only a few days ago I was listening on the radio, they were saying that Theresa May is also considering changing, or the government is considering changing the term from violence to abuse, because domestic violence, obviously, what do you think of domestic violence? Physical, isn't it? Something physical, physical assault. But abuse is more encompassing, so it covers emotional abuse, it covers physical, it covers financial, it covers sexual, it covers so many different types. The impact it has on people's lives is unbelievable. And it's very important to note that men are victims as well. So although you find a lot of the time women's organisations that bring or highlight this issue, and a lot of times the speakers are women, it's not just an exclusively women problem, although the majority of victims, 84% or whatever, or 86%, are women, about 14 are men. So men are also victims, and there's actually now organisations that have been set up for male victims of domestic abuse and violence. Because it might not just be the spouse, it could be extended family, it can be a lot of people involved in that abuse. And that's also one factor which makes it very different from domestic abuse in other communities. There can be other individuals involved, like family members. And also for men it's even harder because, you know, as men you're supposed to be able to, you know, handle yourself, you know. So they're maybe not going to get as much empathy or sympathy from people if they report it. And I've personally dealt with men who have been victims. Women, like I said, the majority of victims are women. They suffer from depression. So this is all the impact of domestic abuse. It causes depression, anxiety, mental illness, self-harm, post-separation abuse. Okay, it's just really horrific. I remember we were doing a radio program, Radio Ramadan, I think a couple of years ago, and there was a survivor of domestic abuse in the studio, and she was saying that sometimes I'm washing the dishes and I have flashbacks. This is years after she's left the man and, you know, lives by herself, but she still has flashbacks. Children who are witnessing, because a lot, obviously this is happening in the home, and when children witness domestic abuse, that has an impact on them. So the emotional effects of witnessing domestic abuse are very similar to the psychological trauma associated with being a victim of child abuse. So it impacts not only on, say, the woman, the wife, but could impact on the children. And there's a bit of research going on, or discussion of whether people who are abused, do they then go on to become abusers or not. There's nothing conclusive. So going back to the booklet, the issue that we had, or was posed to me, was that, look, some men are trying to justify their behaviour using Islam. Surprise, surprise. Okay. So the booklet's importance really was to address that one issue, or that was the core issue that we had to address. Now, I've brought a copy of it. I couldn't find too many. There's a few leaflets at the back. There's a copy for everyone to have a look at. You can get it in PDF. Okay, so if you just go to this website, unityfamily.co.uk, go to the people tag, and under my bio, you can just click it and you can just download it. Okay, so it's available, and it's available in different. You can get in different languages as well. And the key issue for me was how a particular verse in the Quran is understood, which could be used inappropriately to justify domestic violence. Now, in this area, there's a lot of stereotypes and misunderstandings. And I remember I was speaking to somebody at one of these kind of seminars, non-Muslim. She actually put her hand up and said, "I'm really sorry, forgive my ignorance, but I don't know a lot, and I might get this wrong." I said, "Don't worry about it. A lot of Muslims don't know a lot as well." Right? So unfortunately, we misunderstand a lot of things as well. So I said, "Don't worry about it." But there's this stereotype of unequal treatment of women in Islam, and I remember very distinctly. There was a seminar, and there was a social worker. She put her hand up, and she said, "I'm just interested. Why did you write the booklet? And why are you so passionate about this?" I was like, "Is that a trick question?" But then, when I thought about that, what I said to her was, I said, "Look, this is oppression, and any Muslim who knows about oppression, it's up to them to do something about it." So I said, whether the oppression is against children, women, the environment, whoever it is, our duty is to do something about it. This is what I can do, I can educate. Then later on I thought about it, I thought, she was actually just very surprised at why is that a man who's got a beard, right, looks very kind of religious, and she probably thinks he's probably the kind of person that does this kind of stuff. Why is he actually standing up and defending, on her eyes, what was Muslim women? Because of the stereotypes, and this has obviously got to do with, unfortunately, some behaviour from some people in the Muslim community, but also to do with media and other things. So there's a lot of negative stereotypes that we have to get away from. And I remember speaking to a domestic abuse worker, and this is when I'd written a leaflet and I was doing it and just promoting it. And she'd shown it to some of her victims. And she said, you know, just the fact that you're a male and you wrote this is so empowering for women. And I didn't realise this because she goes, they're just not used to that. So that brings me to a very good point, is the importance of, especially men, speaking out against this. Like I said, even amongst service providers, sometimes there's stereotypes and prejudices which you have to overcome in dealing with this. So the booklet itself, very, very quickly, you can read it in depth, but very quickly, when I looked at the topic, there's a few important points that we had to make. First of all, Islamic law is complex and sophisticated, okay? And you can't just take a verse out of isolation. So if I say, you know, you can drink alcohol as long as you don't do it prayer times. Is anyone going to agree with me? Put your hand up if you agree with me. Surprising, by not a single person agreed. If I said to you, Allah says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى, don't go to the salah and you're in a state of intoxication. It's Quran, isn't it? Are you going to still accept it? No, you're not, because you're going to say to me, Ya Shaykh. Right? Read the other verses. This was abrogated. This was at one stage, but then it was abrogated. Okay? So, just taking a verse, and this is a very important point because this happens so much now, whether it's journalists or whether it's even, probably the easiest example is extremists. They take one verse, and they take it out of context. What's before it, what's after it, when was it revealed, what was the circumstances, has it been abrogated or not? So it's very important to make people understand that, look, you can't just take one particular hadith or one particular verse and start forming your whole thesis on it. So we have to understand verses in the right context. Don't just take a translation and just start bashing at people's heads. That doesn't mean you've understood it. And that's why there's something which is very dangerous, which are called DIY Islam. Okay, so it's like one scholar said, people they get a book on Monday, read it Tuesday, and by Wednesday they get fatwa. Right? And this is unfortunately the time we're living in. So you get people now arguing with you. You say, brother, where did you get that? I watched a clip on YouTube. And you're like, brother, you know, it's a bit more to it than that. So this is unfortunately very a big problem. People just no training whatsoever, going in, trying to understand text by themselves. Our tradition has always been a tradition of learning from a student to a teacher to a student. The Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba taught the Tabi'een, and so on. Right? It wasn't just, there's the Quran, right? You know Arabic, go and read it. There's always been a teaching system. And that brings us to the point of the importance of the Sunnah in understanding the Quran. So when you have a verse of Quran, you have to look at, so what did the Prophet ﷺ say about this? What does the Sunnah teach us? Because the Sunnah, one of the characteristics of the Sunnah, or one of the functions of the Sunnah, the practice of the Prophet ﷺ and sayings, is to clarify what is ambiguous in the Quran. The easiest example is Salah. In the Quran it says, Aqimu Salah, establish the prayer. It does not tell you how to pray. It does not tell you how to pray. So if you say, I'm just going to follow the Quran, okay, establish the prayer. How are you going to do it? You have to go to the Sunnah. The Sunnah tells you, is it takbir, you raise your hands, you do this, you get here, and you bow and so on. So the way of establishing the Salah is explained in the Sunnah. Okay, so you have to have the Sunnah, which is an explanation, a lot of times explaining what is the Quran. So if you look at the Sunnah, there's a very important concept that scholars have taken out, the concept of harm in Islam. So there's a legal maxim which says, Ad-dararu yuzal, harm must be eliminated. There's another very famous hadith, La darara wa la dirar, that the harm should not be done, nor should it be reciprocated. It's a fundamental principle that harm is, we always try to eliminate the harm. Also, fundamental is that oppression is unlawful. Dhulm is unlawful. And in the Quran it says, the la'na, the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is on the oppressors. And Allah does not like the oppressors, and so on. That harm is is wrong, whether it's against humans, animals, or the environment. So this is a harm that's a general principle. Okay. So let's go to the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, after highlighting why the Sunnah is so important, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Surely you have an excellent example for your guidance in the life of the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So we go to the Sunnah for clarification, and also as a role model. How do we live our lives? How do we deal with these issues? So it's very important to look at the Prophet's marital life. How was he with his wives? Okay. Did they have any issues? Did they have? It was all hunky-dory? It was all flowers? No, it wasn't. There was disagreement. Sometimes there was hot disagreement. Okay, but how did the Prophet deal with it? And this is very fundamental. The Prophet emphasized good behavior with spouses. He said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي. The best of you, the best amongst you, are those who are best to their wives. Okay, so it doesn't matter how much salah you do, how much fasting you do, if you're not good to your wife, you can't be the best to the woman. A crucial question: did the Prophet ever hit his wives? Crucial. In Muslim it says, a hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ never hit any of his wives. In fact, the hadith actually says he never hit anybody. He never hit his wives, he never hit children, and he never hit any slaves or servants. Okay. So the Sunnah, the ideal, is that there should be no hitting whatsoever, even of children. Even of children. That's the Sunnah. Does that mean there's no marital discord in the Prophet's house? No, of course there was marital discord. However, the Prophet never resolved to physical violence or emotional abuse or any type of abuse. The Prophet actually hated, he actually expressed his hatred of violence against women. There's a hadith in Bukhari that the Prophet was told of some men who had been violent towards a woman, and he told the Sahaba, he said, how can any one of you be violent towards his spouse and lie with her in the evening? Right, in a very kind of angry tone. So it's not just physical, there's emotional abuse as well. Emotional abuse is also equally unlawful. If you look in Surah Hujurat, أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, you believe, لَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّن قَوْمٍ. Right? Let not a party of men laugh at another party of men. Maybe that they're better than those who laugh at them, and then talks about women and so, and goes on. Okay? A lot of times, I'm dealing with a couple, and the person might say, look, he's not physically violent, but he mentally tortures me. That's a form of abuse. Coming to that verse, the key in understanding the verse, and I would reiterate, read the booklet if you want a proper understanding. I'm just going to just highlight a few points here, very important points. Firstly, the translation of the verse is very problematic. If you look at some of the translations, the verse is فَعِلُوهُنَّ, admonish them, وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, then leave them in the bed, وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. And then this is the point which is you have to be careful. It says you can translate it as and then hit them. Now, the different translations, some of them say beat, which is definitely a wrong translation. Some of them say hit. Some of them say hit lightly. I read beat lightly, which I don't understand, because the only thing that you can beat lightly is an egg. Right? So I don't actually understand how do you beat somebody lightly. So you have to be very careful with these verses. Now, in understanding what that means, وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ الضَّرَبْ, which, like I said, could be translated as hit, it's very interesting. Ibn Abbas, who was one of the companions, he was known for his deep understanding of the Quran, and that Prophet ﷺ made a dua for him to give him understanding of the Quran. And he said what is meant here is the hitting, like the hitting of a miswak, okay, like a toothstick. So it's like a kind of tap. And from that, it's understood that the point of this is actually a symbolic thing and not supposed to be something that inflicts physical harm and pain. And also, it's used in an specific extreme situation. It's not, if the food's not ready, you can go and eat a smacker. If you look at the verse, and the verse actually explains this, فَعِلُهُنَّ admonish, okay? Then it's, so first of all, it's saying, look, and the thing is, it's not to do with, very important, it's not to do with things like domestic chores. It's to do with a very, very serious issue like infidelity. You're supposed to admonish, this is haram, this is against the sacred law. The person doesn't respond. Stay away from them in the bed. In other words, you take that kind of physical touch away, because that physical touch affects the woman in such a way, it's an emotional thing that he's upset, and what you're upset about. And then it comes to that bit about what's legal. Okay, so it's the steps in it. And there's a very important principle that it must be convinced that it will lead to the desired result of reconciliation. Because the whole point of the verse was to avoid divorce. Okay, which is, like I said, it's in a very, very serious situation where the next step is going to be divorce. And it has to obviously lead to reconciliation. If it's not going to lead to reconciliation, then you can't do it. If more harm and damage is going to be caused to the marriage, it wouldn't be allowed. And you could argue that in the culture that we've been brought up on, right, any type of hitting, even if it's symbolic, would be negative. It would not be understood in a positive way, and therefore it wouldn't be allowed. So from today's seminar, I'll just touching upon those points. You can read it in depth in the booklet. From today's seminar, what I really want you guys to take away? First of all, we need to educate ourselves, okay, on the severity of domestic abuse. This, I'm not underestimating, it destroys lives. It really does destroy lives, and it takes people a long time. It leads to all sorts of mental illnesses, and then people have to get over it, rebuild their lives. It really does destroy lives. And like I said, it can have knock-on effects on children as well. Lack of action is due not to realising the extent and impact of domestic abuse. Okay, so my belief is that why are people not more active? I just think that they don't know. They do not realise the severity of this, and if we can show them and educate them on the severity, they'll be more likely to take action. And statistics remain worryingly high. Okay, I did a campaign with a couple of years ago on domestic abuse. We went and visited all the mosques in Scotland, and alhamdulillah, some imams were on the ball. We knew what was going on, and a lot of them weren't. Some of them were actually said, I remember one said, this doesn't happen in our community. Okay, so obviously if the person doesn't believe it happens, he's not going to do anything about it. He's never going to do anything about it because he thinks it doesn't happen. So what you have to do is convince them that look, it does happen, and explain and educate. Once you do that, then the impetus will be there for them to do something about it. And finally, it can't just all be talk, which we're alhamdulillah very good at doing right there. You can't just talk, you need to walk the walk as well. So going back to that maximum I mentioned, harm must be eliminated. Okay, and how do we change? How do we try to eliminate this harm? How can we eliminate this harm in our community? The long-term solution is changing attitudes. Why do I say that? Because the laws there, domestic abuse is illegal. Right? You can go to prison. Has it stopped domestic abuse? The stats are just going up. So just having laws is not sufficient. We have to change people's behaviour, and that's only going to happen through changing attitudes, which takes a long period. So sustained education, sustained awareness. So our duty. This hadith is very important. Unsur akhaka, right? Help your brother. Zaliman, right? Whether he's an oppressor or mazluman, or if he's oppressed. And they asked the companion asked the Prophet, we understand helping our brother when he's oppressed. How can we help him if he's oppressed? And the Prophet said, stop him from doing the oppression. So, domestic abuse, as the word says, domestic, happens in the home. And a lot of time, people know about it. Family members know about it. Right? So, it might be your brother, it might be your sister. Extended family know about it. Friends know about it. Neighbours know about it. So, a lot of times, other people know about it, and you cannot afford to turn a blind eye. Because that's oppression, and you have a duty to stop that oppression. And this hadith, many of you probably know, whoever amongst you sees an evil, then he should change it. Right? He should change it. بِيَدِهِ, his hand. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. And if he can't, then with his tongue. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ. If he can't with his tongue, then with his heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. And that's the weakest of Iman. But it means that you have to still do something. You can't just sit back. In fact, now, and I don't know what the situation is here, but they introduced something in the kind of Strathclyde police area, which is called third-party reporting. So this is where a third person who knows about abuse can actually report it anonymously. So the law's actually getting stricter and stricter. At one point it used to be, you would report it and they would come and you could drop the charges. Now you can't do that. It's that the prosecutor fiscal will actually take the case forward, even if you want to drop the charges. Okay, that was domestic abuse. A form of domestic abuse which was asked to also just touch upon is forced marriage. Now, simply put, if you look at the Quran and the vision of marriage in the Quran, you've heard this verse, I'm sure, at weddings all the time, that from his wonders that he creates you from, makes out of your own kind. Right? Azwaja, pairs, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so that you might incline towards him, or sometimes this is translated as peace or tranquility. وَجَعْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, and he's made love and tenderness between you. So that's what marriage should do. Now, if you're forced into a marriage, it goes against these concepts of love and mercy. It's actually going against that Quranic vision. Not only that, the Prophet ﷺ, like I said, what do? We go to the Quran and we go to the Sunnah. What does the Sunnah teach us? The Prophet ﷺ was against forced marriages. Two hadith I'll give you, one in Abu Dawud and another one in Nasa'i. The first one, where previously unmarried women came to the Prophet ﷺ and said that she'd been forced to marriage. فَخَيَّرَهَا. So the Prophet ﷺ gave her a choice. In other words, you can continue or you can do this. The second one, Aisha says a young woman came to her and said, my father married me to my brother's son, cousin. Right? In order to raise his social standing, you could say now, to get a visa, right? In some cases. And did not want this marriage, I was forced into it. Aisha said, sit here until the Prophet comes. The Messenger of Allah came and she told him about the girl. So he sent for her father, called the father. And when the father came, he said to the girl, you have a choice. You can stay in the marriage or leave it. And she said, O Messenger of Allah, I've accepted what my father did. Okay, I'm happy with this marriage, but I wanted to prove something to other women. In other words, she was making a point. She wanted to make a point that the father has no right to do this. Okay, if it's against her will. So you can't argue against that. The Prophet says, okay, so it's very clear. So anyone who tries to justify it, I'm sorry, but it's very clear. Understanding how it works. Okay, so how it works is that unfortunately a lot of parents believe they have the Islamic right to force their child to marry whoever they want. And this is a classic case of culture confused with religion. Because I just showed you the two hadith before that. Where did they get this from? From general text such as we have enjoyed upon man goodness towards his parents. So we know everyone's supposed to be obedient to their parents. And we also know that to be disobedient is a major sin. So this is sometimes used, if you don't marry such and such, then you're being disobedient, and Allah's not going to be happy with you. And this is used to put emotional pressure, blackmail on somebody to go into a marriage that they don't want. So often emotional pressure is put, if you don't marry so-and-so, then you're not my son, so that you will be disassociated. Okay, and cutting ties is haram. So you're going to threaten somebody with haram. It doesn't make sense. It just makes no sense at all. Wider family members also join in. So what they do is, okay, I'm not getting much success with these uncles, you have a word. And before you know, you've got 20 people on your case. And some people, they're 20 years old, you've got 20 people on your case, you just get under so much pressure, you just finally just go, okay, fair enough, I want peace, I want stress-free life, I'll do whatever you want. Many people don't turn to the fact that the law's getting stricter. So the Forced Marriage Act that came out in England, I think in 2007, it came out in Scotland in 2011, and there's one distinction with the English Act and the Scottish Act. The English Act made it a civil matter. The Scottish Act went a bit further. It said the order will be a civil order, a forced marriage protection order, but if you breach it, it becomes criminal. Now, very recently, it's going to become criminal now. The law's getting stricter. So now it's going to become a criminal offence to force somebody into marriage. But even with that, like I said, the law's not enough. Okay. Why? Because some people will just not turn to the law. Why is this? Because they love their parents and they know that the parents, in their own mind, want the best for them, and so they don't want to punish them by sending them to prison. And also, it's the fear of reaction of the wider family. They're not going to hear the end of this. Oh, you brought shame on our family, our parents have to go to the court, and it'll actually make things worse. So, because of these two factors, they're unlikely to report it. So, what's the way forward? How do we deal with this issue? How do we try and address it? First of all, misunderstanding of Islamic text needs to be addressed. Yes, your child has to be obedient to you. But if you said to your child, don't pray, do they have to obey you? If your father said, I don't want to wear hijab, do you have to obey him? If your father said, I want you to drink alcohol, do you have to obey him? No, so it's not absolute obedience. It's obedience according to the sacred law. And if the sacred law has said that they're not allowed to force you, how can they use that? Okay? So we have to explain this and clarify it. Also, clarifying the difference between arranged and forced. And a lot of people just are confused about this. Arranged, you still have a choice. I think it's just a sophisticated form of a dating agency, to be honest. Done by your parents. Whereas forced marriage, obviously we know what that is. Educating parents that they don't own their child, and they have no Islamic right to force their child into marriage. Solutions. First of all, clarification that there's no Islamic obligation upon you to marry someone you don't want to. So when I get young people, I'm in this situation where parents are forcing me. First of all, say, look, there's no obligation upon you. You have every right to say no. Secondly, the wrath of God is not going to be upon you if you say no. Well, they're saying, if I don't do it, I'm going to go to hell. I said, no, you're not going to hell. Right? Don't worry about it. Allah's wrath is not going to be on you because it's not obligatory upon you in the first place. Secondly, and sometimes make them think, okay, say you go into this marriage, you don't want it. Are you really going to be motivated to try and make it work? We're living in a time when normal marriages are breaking down that people wanted to go into. So if you're going into a marriage you don't even want in the first place, the impetus is not going to be there to try and make things work when things go wrong. So, yes, your parents might be unhappy with you saying no now, but in 3 years' time when you've got 3 kids, then you turn around and say, well, I don't want this marriage. Is that going to be worse or better? Okay, so you have to make people think about what's happening and the consequences of it. It needs to be clarified, our position of forced marriage. Those hadith need to be clarified through courses. So one of the things I do pre-marriage courses, marriage courses, and I bring this up. So obviously talks on marriage, khutbahs, all these kind of things, or any medium you have of getting the message out. And breaking, and this is crucial, breaking cultural practices which are non-Islamic can only really be done through Islamic education. Because the only thing that will take more importance over cultural practices is our deen, is our religion. Okay, that's the only thing that can break it. So you have to highlight what our tradition is. Engaging with religious and community leaders to raise community awareness. So speaking to imams, speaking to other people in the community to raise awareness. So my kind of come to an end in case you get time. My contribution in this area, I produced a leaflet called the Reminder Leaflet, and I brought some with me today. And what happened was, back in 2010, when I discussed the issue with the Scottish Government, we decided to make a leaflet clarifying in simple language. We did it in different languages, and I went around all the mosques in Scotland and got the imams to talk about the khutbah and stuff. Then, as a follow-up from that, we did a campaign called Muslim Men Against Domestic Violence. This is a petition that I did with our women's organisation, and again we got men to sign up. Obviously raising awareness through conferences and marriage courses. And then in 2012, I did a similar leaflet on forced marriage. And last year, no, not last year, this year, just actually about 6 months ago, I did another, the latest campaign was Imams Against Forced Marriage. And what we did was we got a statement based on those hadith, and we got a bit around Scotland, we got 27 Imams to sign it. And if you go to Facebook and just type that in, you can actually see the statement there with the signatures, and you can actually download it. Okay. I didn't actually have any copies with me. So basically everyone needs to make their contribution in this area. And finally, our role as imams or community leaders or organisations, service providers, whatever role we have a responsibility to tackle this issue. We have to have a united commitment to fighting domestic abuse in all its forms. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. This is a long-term problem. In fact, you know how much the government spends on domestic abuse? 23 billion a year. 23 billion pounds a year. This is a massive, like, in all the kind of, the kind of indirectly, this is how much they spend on it. And very importantly, it's very important for men to speak out against domestic abuse, because the majority of victims are women, and it's very empowering when men speak out against it. Okay, so don't underestimate that. And lastly, okay, it's got to be action, not just words. We can't just talk about it. We need to act upon it. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to inshallah try to do as much as we can in our capacities. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله رب العالمين.